Lieutenant Kim Tae's eyes opened slowly, like someone waking from the deepest sleep of their life. The ceiling above him wasn't metal or concrete, like he expected from a military hospital. Instead, it was made of some kind of smooth, pearl-colored material that seemed to glow softly with its own light. Strange symbols moved across the surface like living things, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. His body felt different. Not just tired or sore like after a long battle, but completely renewed. His left shoulder, which had been torn apart by Valari plasma fire during the fighting, moved without any pain at all. The deep scar across his chest from the explosion that should have killed him was completely gone. Even his old training injuries from years ago had vanished. Tae tried to sit up, and his head spun with confusion. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was fire and screaming. The evacuation ships full of families trying to escape Kepler Station, while those vicious Valari raiders closed in for the kill. He remembered making the choice that every soldier dreads, but knows they might have to make someday. The choice to stay behind so others could live. "You are awake, honored warrior," said a voice that sounded like music mixed with water flowing over stones. Tae turned his head and saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. A woman stood beside his bed, but she wasn't human. Her skin was the color of a perfect summer sky, blue and smooth as silk. Silver markings ran along her arms and face in patterns that seemed to shift when she moved. Her hair was white as fresh snow, but with streaks of silver that caught the light. She was beautiful in a way that was completely alien, but somehow familiar at the same time. "I know this must be very strange for you," she continued, her English perfect but with an accent he had never heard before. "I am Healer Vesa. You have been in our care for 3 months while your body recovered from your injuries." 3 months? Tae tried to process this information. The battle at Kepler Station. Did we win? Are the civilians safe? Healer Vesa smiled, and when she did, the silver markings on her face seemed to brighten. "More than safe, Lieutenant Kim Tae. Your actions that day did something no one thought possible. You ended the war." "Ended the war?" Tae's voice cracked. The war between humans and the Valari Empire had been going on for over 200 years. His grandfather had fought in it. His father had died in it. Tae himself had been fighting since he was 18 years old. Wars like that don't just end because of one battle. The Valari High Senate was so impressed by your courage and sacrifice that they called for immediate peace talks, Vesa explained. "You see, in Valari culture, there is nothing more respected than a warrior who willingly gives his life to protect those who cannot protect themselves. When our sensors showed you staying behind to manually override the station's defense systems, while the evacuation ships escaped, even our most hardened military commanders were moved to tears." Tae shook his head. "I was just doing my job. Any soldier would have done the same thing. But you did not just do your job," Vesa said gently. "According to our records, you had 17 chances to escape to safety. 17 times you chose to stay and fight so that more civilians could get away. Even when your squad leader ordered you to retreat, you disobeyed direct orders to save lives." The memories came flooding back now. The chaos of the evacuation, children crying as their parents pushed them toward the escape pods. The horrible moment when he realized the defense systems had been damaged and someone would have to stay behind to operate them manually. The look in his squad leader's eyes when Tae told him to go without him. "The High Senate has declared you a hero of the Valari people," Vesa continued. "This is an honor that has never been given to a human before. They wish to present you with our most sacred gift as a symbol of eternal friendship between our peoples." Before Tae could ask what this gift was, the door to his room opened with a soft hissing sound. 3 figures entered, wearing elaborate robes that seemed to be made of starlight itself. But it was the 4th figure that made Tae's heart stop. She was Valari like Healer Vesa, but younger and even more beautiful. Her blue skin had silver markings that formed intricate patterns across her arms, shoulders, and face. Her eyes were the color of deep ocean water, and they seemed to hold depths of intelligence and sadness that took his breath away. She wore a simple white dress that seemed to flow like water around her graceful form. "Lieutenant Kim Tae," said the lead figure in the starlight robes. "I am Senator Koss of the High Senate. On behalf of our entire civilization, I present to you our most precious gift. This is Ara, daughter of the noble house of Thes. She has been trained since childhood in the arts of war and peace, language and culture, healing and protection. She is now your life-bonded companion, bound to you by the sacred laws of our people. Ara stepped forward, and to Tay's horror and confusion, dropped to one knee before his bed. Her head bowed low in a gesture of complete submission. "I live to serve you, my bonded lord," she said in a voice that was soft but carried an undertone of something Tay couldn't quite identify. Resignation? Fear? He wasn't sure, but it made his stomach twist with discomfort. This wasn't right. This wasn't what heroes were supposed to get as rewards. The room fell silent after Senator Koss finished speaking. Tay stared at Ara, still kneeling beside his bed, and felt his stomach drop like he was falling through space. This couldn't be what it sounded like. This had to be some kind of translation error or cultural misunderstanding. "I'm sorry," Tay said slowly, his voice hoarse. "Did you just say she belongs to me now?" Senator Koss tilted his head, those strange silver markings on his face shifting slightly. "Perhaps your human language lacks the proper words to express this honor. Ara is now your life-bonded companion. She is yours to command, to protect and to cherish for as long as you both shall live." Tay felt sick. "You mean she's my slave?" The reaction in the room was immediate and shocking. Senator Koss stepped backward, as if Tay had slapped him. "Healer." Vesa gasped and put her hand over her heart. Even Ara looked up from her kneeling position with wide, frightened eyes. "Please, Lieutenant," Senator Koss said, his voice tight with what sounded like barely controlled anger. "That word is deeply offensive to our people. The gift bond is our most sacred tradition. It is an honor beyond measure." "But she has no choice in this, right?" Tay pressed. "She can't say no. She can't leave. She has to do whatever I tell her to do." "Of course," Senator Koss replied, looking confused by the question. "That is what makes it such a precious gift. A companion who chooses freely might change her mind tomorrow. But a gift-bonded companion is yours forever, loyal and devoted, until death." Tay wanted to throw up. He looked down at Ara, who was still kneeling, her head bowed so low that her white hair fell forward like a curtain around her face. "Ara," he said gently, "please stand up." She rose gracefully to her feet, but kept her eyes focused on the floor. "How may I serve you, my lord?" "First, don't call me lord, my name is Tay. Second, I need to understand something. Do you want to be here?" Ara's eyes flickered up to meet his for just a moment before dropping back down. "I was raised for this purpose, my lord." "Tay, since I was 5 years old, I've been trained in 17 different forms of combat, 12 human languages, advanced medical treatment, cultural diplomacy, and the traditional arts of companionship. This is my destiny." "That's not what I asked," Tay said. "I asked if you want to be here. If you had a choice, what would you choose?" For a long moment, Ara didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Want is not a word that applies to someone like me." Senator Koss cleared his throat loudly. "Lieutenant, perhaps you need more time to understand the honor we have bestowed upon you. The gift bond has been part of our culture for over 3,000 years. It represents trust, loyalty, and the highest respect we can show to a worthy individual." "And what happens if I refuse this honor?" Tay asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Senator Koss's silver markings went completely dark, and healer Vesa actually stepped away from the bed. "Refuse?" Senator Koss's voice was dangerously quiet. "No one has ever refused a gift bond. It would be seen as the ultimate insult to our entire civilization. The peace treaty we signed 3 days ago was based on the understanding that you would accept this honor with the gratitude it deserves." Tay felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Are you saying that if I don't accept Ara as my companion, the war starts again?" "I'm saying that such an insult would require the High Senate to reconsider whether humans are truly worthy of peace," Senator Koss replied coldly. Tay looked at Ara again. She was trembling slightly, though trying hard to hide it. "And what happens to her if I refuse?" This time it was Ara who answered, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I would be declared honorless. In your human terms, I would become an outcast. No Valari family would take me in. No Valari employer would hire me. I would be forbidden from returning to my home world or having contact with my people. Most who become honorless choose to end their lives rather than face such existence. Jesus, Tay whispered, running his hands through his hair. This was insane. He was a soldier, trained to make impossible decisions under pressure, but this was beyond anything he had ever faced. Accept what was essentially a slave, or condemn an innocent woman to death, and possibly restart a war that had already cost millions of lives. I need time to think, he said finally. Senator Koss nodded curtly. Of course, we will leave Ara here to attend to your needs while you consider. She will answer any questions you have about her training or capabilities. The three senators filed out of the room, leaving Tay alone with healer Vesa and Ara. Vesa checked some kind of medical device beside his bed and then quietly left as well. Ara remained standing beside the bed, perfectly still, waiting for orders that Tay couldn't bring himself to give. Ara, he said finally, tell me the truth. Have you ever had a choice about anything in your life? She was quiet for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. When I was 7 years old, they brought me 12 different types of flowers and asked me to choose which one I liked best for my garden. I chose the white ones with silver edges like my markings. She paused. That is the only choice I remember making. Tay closed his eyes and tried to figure out how a war hero was supposed to handle becoming a slave owner, even if that had never been his intention, even if refusing might start the war all over again, even if saying no might get an innocent woman killed. There had to be another way, there had to be, but looking at Ara standing there waiting patiently for him to decide her entire future, Tay realized he might be the only person in the galaxy who could figure out what that other way might. For over the next few days, Tay tried everything he could think of to make Ara feel more comfortable. He asked her to sit when he sat, to eat when he ate, to speak freely about whatever was on her mind. But every attempt seemed to make her more nervous, not less. Ara, please, he said one morning, as she stood perfectly still beside his breakfast table while he ate. Just sit down and have some food with me. I hate eating alone. She glanced at the empty chair across from him like it might bite her. Gift-bonded companions do not eat at the same table as their lords, Tay. It would be improper. Says who? The instructors at the training center. Rule 47 of proper companion behavior. Tay put down his fork. How many rules were there? 836, Ara replied without hesitation, plus seasonal variations and special circumstance protocols. The casual way she said it made Tay's blood run cold. 800 rules about how to be someone's property. Ara flinched at the word property but nodded. We began learning them at age 6. By age 10, we were expected to recite all of them. Perfectly. Failure to remember a rule meant... She touched a small faded mark on her wrist that Tay had noticed before but assumed was a birthmark. They hurt you for forgetting rules? Only at first, Ara said quickly, as if that made it better. Once we learned properly, the punishments became unnecessary. Tay felt sick to his stomach. Ara, how many others are there? People like you, I mean. You mean gift-bonded companions? She tilted her head, thinking. Currently active bonds number approximately 12,000 across the Valari Empire. But that does not include those still in training, those who have completed training but not yet been gifted, or those who have been retired. Retired? When a bonded lord dies, or when a companion becomes too old to serve effectively, or when, she paused, choosing her words carefully, when a companion fails to meet expectations. Tay pushed his plate away, his appetite completely gone. What happens to the retired ones? Most are sent to work colonies on the outer rim planets. Some are allowed to serve in lesser positions if they have useful skills. A few... She hesitated again. A few what, Ara? A few choose the honorable path of self-termination rather than face a life of dishonor. The room went completely silent. Tay stared at Ara, trying to process what she had just told him so calmly. You're talking about suicide? I am talking about maintaining honor in the face of failure, Ara corrected, but her voice was quieter now. Tay stood up and started pacing around the room. This is insane. How can an entire civilization think this is okay? Because we are not like you, Ara said simply. We are the bonded caste. We were created to serve. Created? Tay stopped pacing and turned to look at her. What do you mean? Created? Ara seemed to realize she had said something she shouldn't have. Her face went pale and she took a step backward. I misspoke. I meant we were trained to serve. No, you said created. What did you mean by that? For the first time since he had met her, Ara looked genuinely frightened. Please, Tay. I cannot. Speak of such things. It is forbidden. Forbidden by who? I'm your lord, right? According to your rules, you have to do what I tell you. So I'm telling you to explain what you meant. Ara's hands began to shake. She looked around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Finally, she sank into the chair across from him and buried her face in her hands. The bonded caste is not born naturally, she whispered. We are bred, selected, genetically modified before birth to be more docile, more obedient, more pleasing to look at. Our parents are chosen based on specific traits. Our development is monitored and controlled from conception to adulthood. Tay felt like someone had punched him in the chest. You're telling me that your people deliberately breed other people to be slaves? Not slaves, Ara said desperately. Companions. There is a difference. Is there? Really? Ara was quiet for a long time. When she finally looked up at him, there were tears in her ocean blue eyes. I used to think so. I was taught that we were special, chosen, honored to serve the greater good of Valari society. But sometimes, late at night in the dormitories, some of the older trainees would whisper about the time before. About Valari who looked like us but lived free, made their own choices, had their own families. What happened to them? The Great Reformation, 300 years ago. The High Senate decided that natural-born Valari were too unpredictable to serve as companions, too likely to develop attachments that would interfere with their duties, so they began the breeding programs. Tay sank back into his chair, overwhelmed. How many of you are there in total? In training, active service and retirement, perhaps 50,000 across all Valari worlds. 50,000 people bred to be property, Tay muttered. And now that the war is over, there are fewer opportunities for gift bonding, Ara finished his thought. Military heroes were always the most common recipients. With peace, there will be fewer heroes to reward. So what happens to all of you? Ara's voice became very small. The training centers are already discussing efficiency measures, reduced breeding programs, earlier retirement ages, more strict performance standards. Tay understood what she wasn't saying directly. With fewer people needing companions, the Valari were planning to simply get rid of the excess. The thought made him feel physically ill. Ara, he said quietly, when you were little, before all the training and rules, what did you want to be when you grew up? She looked at him with confusion. I don't understand the question. If you could have been anything, done anything with your life, what would you have chosen? Ara stared at him for a long moment, as if he had asked her to solve an impossible puzzle. I used to like the stars, she said finally. During free time, I would sneak up to the roof of the dormitory and look at them. I wondered what it would be like to travel between them, to explore new worlds, to discover things no one had seen before. You wanted to be an explorer, I suppose, but such dreams are foolish for someone like me. Tay looked at this beautiful, intelligent woman who had been robbed of her entire life before it had even begun, and felt her anger building in his chest, unlike anything he had ever experienced in combat. The Valari had called him a hero. But heroes were supposed to save people. Maybe it was time he figured out how to save 50,000 people who had never been given the chance to save themselves. The news broke on every major network across human space within hours. Lieutenant Kim Tay, the war hero who had single-handedly ended the centuries-long conflict with the Valari Empire, had refused to participate in the traditional bonding ceremony with his gifted companion. Instead, he had done something that shocked both species to their core. He had introduced Ara to the galactic media as his equal partner. This is Ara, Tay had said, during what was supposed to be a simple press conference about the peace treaty. She is not my property, not my servant, and not my reward. She is a person with her own thoughts, feelings, and dreams, and she deserves the same respect and freedom that any person deserves. The reaction was immediate and explosive. On Earth and the human colonies, the response was divided right down the middle. Half the population praised Tai as a hero, who stood up for basic human rights even when applied to aliens. The other half accused him of being ungrateful and potentially endangering the fragile peace by insulting Valari culture. "He's spitting, say in the face of their most sacred tradition," complained General Hayes during a heated interview on the global news network. "This isn't about slavery or freedom. This is about respecting the customs of our new allies. Tai is being selfish and reckless." But Dr. Lisa Park, a professor of xenocultural ethics, saw it differently. "What Lieutenant Tai has done is exactly what we should expect from our heroes. He's refusing to participate in a system that treats sentient beings as objects. The fact that it's traditional doesn't make it right." The debates raged for days. Protesters gathered outside government buildings on dozens of worlds, some supporting Tai's stance, others demanding he be forced to complete the bonding ceremony to preserve the peace. On Valari Prime, the reaction was even more intense. Conservative senators called emergency sessions of the High Senate. Senator Koss, who had originally presented Ara to Tai, appeared on Valari news networks looking furious and embarrassed. "This human has shown his true barbaric nature," Koss declared. "He takes our most precious gift and treats it like garbage. He insults not just the High Senate, but 3,000 years of sacred tradition. Perhaps we were wrong to think humans were capable of true civilization." But not all Valari agreed. Younger senators, intellectuals, and surprisingly, some military officers began speaking out in support of Tai's actions. Senator Vela, a progressive voice who had often been ignored by the High Senate, gave a speech that was broadcast across the empire. "Perhaps," she said, "it is time we asked ourselves why we consider it honorable to breed people like livestock and give them away as prizes. Perhaps this human has shown us something we have been too blind to see about ourselves." The speech caused riots on 3 Valari worlds. Traditional families demanded Vela be removed from office. Progressive groups held rallies supporting her message. For the first time in centuries, ordinary Valari citizens were openly questioning the caste system that had defined their society. In the middle of all this chaos, Ara was struggling with her own internal revolution. "I don't understand what's happening to me," she confided to Tai one evening as they watched the news coverage together. She was sitting in the chair across from him now, though it had taken days of gentle encouragement before she would do even that. "What do you mean?" Tai asked. "I feel angry," she said, as if the word tasted strange in her mouth. "When I see Senator Koss on the news calling you barbaric, I want to tell him he's wrong. When I hear humans saying you should have just accepted me as your property, I want to scream at them. But companions aren't supposed to feel anger. We were trained to feel only gratitude and contentment." Tai set down his tablet and gave her his full attention. "Ara, anger is a normal human emotion. And despite what your training told you, you're as much a person as anyone else." "But I was designed not to be," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "The genetic modifications, the psychological conditioning, the punishment for independent thought. Everything about me was created to make me compliant and obedient. How do I know if what I'm feeling now is real or just some kind of malfunction?" It was a question that cut straight to Tai's heart. How do you help someone discover who they really are when everything about them has been artificially controlled since before birth? "Tell me about your dreams," he said. "My dreams? When you sleep. What do you dream about?" Ara looked confused. "Companions don't usually remember dreams. The neural conditioning suppresses them to ensure better rest and fewer distractions. But do you remember any? Even small pieces?" Ara was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "Sometimes I dream about flying," she said finally. "Not in a ship, but actually flying through space between the stars. I can see planets and nebulae and things I've never seen before, and I'm not afraid or waiting for orders. I'm just free." "That sounds like a real dream to me," Tai said gently. "And the person having that dream sounds real too." Tears began to flow down Ara's cheeks, but for the first time since he'd met her, they didn't seem to be tears of fear or sadness. They looked almost like relief. I'm starting to remember things from before the advanced conditioning, she whispered. Little things. Playing with other children during recreation time, laughing at jokes, wanting to pet the animals we saw on nature walks, but being told it was inappropriate for future companions to show affection for anything except their bonded lords. Tay felt his own anger building again. They stole your childhood. They stole your right to be human. Or Valerie, I mean. No, Ara said, wiping her eyes. You were right the first time. They stole my right to be human, not genetically, but in here. She touched her chest over her heart. Being human isn't about what species you are. It's about having choices, feeling emotions, being allowed to dream. They tried to take that away from me, but sitting here with you, talking like this, I can feel it coming back. The next morning, Tay made another announcement that sent shockwaves across both civilizations. He and Ara would be traveling together to address the United Planets Council, and they would be proposing new legislation to protect the rights of all sentient beings, regardless of their origin or the circumstances of their birth. The war hero and the woman who was supposed to be his slave were about to take on two entire civilizations, and for the first time since waking up in that medical facility, Tay felt like he was finally fighting for something that really mattered. 3 weeks after their announcement to address the United Planets Council, Tay and Ara were walking through the commercial district of New Geneva Station when something strange happened. A young Velari male, dressed in the simple grey uniform of a station maintenance worker, dropped a small piece of paper near Ara's feet as he passed by. Ara quickly picked it up, glanced at it, and her face went completely white. "What is it?" Tay asked. Ara looked around nervously, then pulled him into a quiet corner behind a food vendor's stall. "It's written in old Velari script," she whispered. "Most people can't read it anymore, but they taught it to us at the training center for ceremonial purposes. What does it say? The Broken Ones meet tonight. Cargo Bay 7, Level C. Come if you seek truth." Ara's hands were shaking as she held the paper. "Tay, Broken Ones is what they call companions who have been damaged by their conditioning, ones who started thinking or feeling too much and had to be retrained or retired." Tay felt his heart rate pick up. "Someone's reaching out to you. Other people like you. But why? And how did they know we were here? Our travel plans were supposed to be secret." That evening, against the advice of their security detail, Tay and Ara made their way to Cargo Bay 7. The area was deserted, filled with stacked shipping containers and the low hum of the station's air recycling systems. For a moment, Tay thought they had made a mistake. Then a figure stepped out from behind one of the containers. It was a Velari female, older than Ara, with the same blue skin and silver markings. But there was something different about her. Where Ara moved with trained grace and kept her eyes downcast, this woman stood straight and looked directly at them with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You came," she said to Ara. "I wasn't sure you would." "Who are you?" Ara asked. "My name is Kira. I was gift-bonded to Admiral Toss 15 years ago." She paused. "Until I started asking questions he didn't. Like." More figures emerged from the shadows between the cargo containers. Tay counted at least a dozen, all Velari, all with the distinctive features of the bonded caste. But like Kira, they carried themselves differently than Ara had when he first met her. They looked like people who had learned to think for themselves. "We've been watching the news coverage of your situation," Kira continued, addressing both Tay and Ara. "What you did, publicly declaring her your equal instead of completing the bonding ceremony, gave hope to companions across the galaxy." "How many of you are there?" Tay asked. An older male stepped forward. "Here on this station, 14 of us. Work in various jobs under false identities. Across human space, maybe 300 that we know of. Throughout Velari territory?" He shrugged. "Thousands, but most are too scared to make contact." "How did you escape?" Ara asked, her voice full of wonder. Kira smiled sadly. "We didn't all escape. Some of us were retired when we became too independent. Others were declared defective and sent to work colonies. A few, like me, had masters who died or lost interest. We learn to forge documents, create new identities, find work where no one asks too many questions about our past. She gestured to the others. Joss there works as a data analyst. Mira cleans offices at night. Vel repairs atmospheric systems. We take the jobs that regular Volari consider beneath them, which makes us invisible. But we've been doing more than just surviving, said Joss, the data analyst. We've been gathering information, evidence. He activated a portable holo display that showed streams of data, genetic charts, and what looked like financial records. We've been documenting everything. The breeding programs, the genetic manipulation, the training centers, the financial networks that support the whole system. Tay studied the display. This is incredible. How did you get access to all this? When you clean government offices at night, people forget you exist, Mira said with a bitter smile. They leave their computers unlocked, their documents on their desks. They have sensitive conversations right in front of you because they don't think you're smart enough to understand. We've been collecting evidence for years, Kira added, but we never knew what to do with it. We're escaped companions. No one would believe us or take us seriously. But you, Lieutenant Tay, you're a war hero. People listen to you. Ara stepped closer to the holo display, her eyes wide as she scanned the data. These financial records, they show how much money the noble houses make from the companion trade. It's not just about tradition or honor, it's about profit. Exactly, Joss said. The training centers alone generate billions of credits annually. The genetic research facilities, the breeding programs, the transport networks, it's all one. Massive economic system built on the backs of people like us. Tay felt sick as he realized the scope of what they were uncovering. This isn't just cultural tradition. It's systematic exploitation on a scale I can barely comprehend. It gets worse, Vel said quietly. Show them the disposal protocols. Joss manipulated the display to show a different set of documents. These were harder to read, full of technical language and bureaucratic terminology, but as Tay passed through them, the meaning became clear. They're planning to eliminate most of the companion population, he said, his voice hollow. The end of the war means fewer gift bondings, Kira explained. The noble houses are looking at their investments and deciding that maintaining 50,000 companions is no longer profitable. The documents outline plans to reduce the population by 80% over the next 10 years. How? Ara asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Accelerated retirement, stricter performance standards, reduced medical care, and for those who resist, Joss highlighted a section of the document, mandatory euthanasia for the good of society. The cargo bay fell silent, except for the hum of the station's machinery. Tay felt like he was looking into the face of pure evil disguised as bureaucratic efficiency. We have to stop this, he said. How? Mira asked. We're just escaped companions and one human soldier. They have the resources of entire star systems. But we have something they don't, Ara said, surprising everyone by speaking up with confidence. We have the truth, and we have proof. Kira nodded slowly. The question is, what do we do with it? Tay looked around at the faces surrounding him. These weren't broken people, despite what their former masters had called them. They were survivors, fighters, and apparently skilled intelligence gatherers. They had spent years risking their lives to document the systematic oppression of their own people. We expose everything, he said, not just to the United Planets Council, but to the galaxy, every news network, every government, every person who will listen. We make it impossible for anyone to claim they didn't know what was happening. That's going to make us enemies of some very powerful people, Kira warned. Tay smiled grimly. I've been fighting enemies my whole adult life, but I've never fought for a cause this important. As they prepared to leave the cargo bay, Joss handed Tay a data chip. Everything we've collected is on here. Names, dates, locations, financial records, genetic manipulation protocols, disposal plans, all of it. Be careful, Kira added. Once word gets out that this information exists, they'll stop at nothing to get it back and silence anyone who's seen it. Walking back to their quarters, Ara was unusually quiet. Finally she spoke. Tay, when we expose all this, what do you think will happen to the companions who are still in the system? The ones who haven't escaped or been retired yet. It was a question Tay had been trying not to think about. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know that keeping this secret won't save them. The disposal plans show they're going to be eliminated. Anyway." "So we fight for all of them?" Ara said, her voice stronger than he had ever heard it. "Not just the ones who escaped, but the ones still trapped in the system." Tay squeezed her hand. "We fight for all of them." Neither of them noticed the small surveillance drone that had been following them since they left the cargo bay, or the fact that their conversation had been recorded and transmitted to a very interested party on Velari Prime. The war for the freedom of 50,000 people was about to begin, and powerful forces were already moving to stop it before it could start. The message arrived on a secure channel 3 days after their meeting in the cargo bay. It was from Senator Vela, the Giu, progressive Velari politician who had spoken out in support of Tai's actions. She wanted to meet in person, and she wasn't alone. "I've brought together a group of people who share your concerns," Senator Vela explained, as she led Tay and Ara into a private conference room aboard her diplomatic transport. "Some of them might surprise you." She wasn't kidding. Sitting around the table were faces Tay recognized from news broadcasts across human space. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the famous human rights lawyer who had spent decades fighting for AI rights. Captain James Park, a decorated military officer who had become an outspoken critic of wartime atrocities. And most shocking of all, Admiral Rebecca Stone, one of the highest-ranking officers in the Human Defense Force. "Admiral," Tay said, standing at attention out of habit. "At ease, Lieutenant," Admiral Stone said with a tired smile. "We're not here as military officers today. We're here as people who've seen something that needs to be stopped." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. "Senator Vela shared some of the preliminary information you've gathered about the companion system. What we're seeing is systematic slavery on a scale that makes historical human atrocities look small by comparison. The genetic manipulation alone violates 17 different interspecies treaties," Captain Park added. "If this information is accurate, the Velari Empire has been committing crimes against sentient beings for centuries." Senator Vela nodded grimly. "On my side, I've been building a coalition of reform-minded senators and citizens. The younger generation of Velari is particularly receptive to change. They're tired of the old ways and ready for something better." Admiral Stone activated a holo-display showing a calendar of upcoming events. "The Galactic Peace Summit is in 6 weeks. It's the perfect opportunity to present all of this evidence to representatives from every major civilization. With the right presentation, we can force immediate action." "What kind of action?" Ara asked. It was the first time she had spoken since entering the room, and Tay noticed how she kept her voice respectful, but didn't bow her head or avoid eye contact like she used to. "Economic sanctions against any world that participates in the companion trade," Dr. Vasquez replied. "Criminal charges against the individuals responsible. Most importantly, immediate liberation and rehabilitation programs for all current companions." "The evidence you've gathered is strong," Captain Park said, "but we need more. We need names, specific locations, financial documentation that shows the money trail, and we need witnesses willing to testify publicly." Kira, the escaped companion they had met in the cargo bay, had joined them via secure video link. "My network can provide witnesses," she said. "Dozens of escaped companions who are willing to tell their stories. But we need guarantees of protection. Some of the people we're going up against have the resources to make us disappear permanently." Admiral Stone's expression darkened. "Which brings us to a problem we've discovered in our own ranks." She manipulated the holo-display to show intelligence reports and communication logs. "While investigating the scope of the companion system, we found something disturbing. Certain high-ranking officers in human military intelligence have been receiving information from Velari contacts for years. Strategic data, troop movements, political intelligence that gave us advantages during the war." Tai felt his stomach drop. "They knew about the companions and said nothing. Worse than that," Captain Park said. "They actively helped cover it up. Any reports from human soldiers who witnessed companion training facilities or questioned the treatment of bonded servants were classified and buried." Several officers who tried to investigate further were reassigned to remote postings. Dr. Vasquez pulled up another set of documents. We're talking about General Hayes, Admiral Morrison, and at least 6 other senior commanders. They traded their silence about systematic slavery for military advantages. Jesus, Tay muttered. How high does this go? We're still investigating, Admiral Stone replied, but it's safe to assume that anyone involved will do everything in their power to stop this information from becoming public. Senator Vela looked troubled. On the Velari side, we're facing similar challenges. The noble houses that profit from the companion trade have significant political influence. They've already begun a campaign to discredit our reform movement. What kind of campaign? Ara asked. They're claiming that ending the companion system would destabilize our entire society, Senator Vela explained. They're spreading rumors that the escaped companions are terrorists planning to attack Velari civilians. Most dangerously, they're suggesting that humans are trying to destroy Velari culture and that the peace treaty was a mistake. Admiral Stone leaned back in her chair. So we're fighting enemies on multiple fronts. Corrupt human officers who want to maintain the status quo, Velari nobles who profit from slavery, and the possibility that exposing all of this could restart the war. Then we make sure our evidence is bulletproof, Tay said. We get everything, documented, verified, and distributed so widely that it can't be suppressed. Already working on it, Kira said from the video link. My people have been copying files and creating backups across dozens of secure servers. If something happens to the originals, we have redundancies. Dr. Vasquez smiled. I like your thinking. We'll also need media allies, journalists who can break the story simultaneously across multiple networks and planets. I can handle the legal framework, she continued. Draft legislation for immediate implementation, prepare criminal charges, set up the rehabilitation programs. But we need to coordinate everything perfectly, Captain Park nodded. This has to be a simultaneous strike. Evidence release, media coverage, legal action, and political pressure all at the same time. If we give them any warning or opportunity to respond, they'll find ways to discredit or suppress everything. They spent the next 4 hours planning every detail. Communication protocols, evidence distribution, witness protection, media coordination, backup plans for backup plans. By the time they finished, Tay felt like they were planning a military operation, which in a way, they were. One more thing, Admiral Stone said as they prepared to leave. Trust no one outside this room with the complete plan. We've already had security leaks, and we can't afford any more. 2 weeks later, those words proved prophetic. Tay was reviewing witness testimonies in his quarters when his secure communicator buzzed with an emergency message from Kira. Her face on the screen looked panicked. They know, she said without preamble. Someone leaked our plans. Velari security forces raided 3 of our safe houses this morning. They arrested 8 of our people and seized computers with backup evidence files. How is that possible? Tay asked. Only a handful of people knew the locations of those safe houses. That's not the worst part, Kira continued. We intercepted communications between Velari and human intelligence services. They're planning a joint operation to arrest everyone involved in our investigation. They're calling it a terrorist conspiracy. Tay felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. When? Tomorrow morning, during the opening ceremony of the Peace Summit. They want maximum media coverage to discredit our movement before we can present any evidence. Who leaked the information? Ara asked, appearing beside Tay. Kira's expression was grim. We're still trying to figure that out, but whoever it was had access to our most sensitive planning documents. It had to be someone in your inner circle. Tay looked at the list of allies they had trusted with their plans. Admiral Stone, Captain Park, Dr. Vasquez, Senator Vela. People he had believed were committed to justice and freedom. One of them was a traitor. And in less than 18 hours, that betrayal would destroy everything they had worked for and condemn 50,000 companions to death. The war hero who had ended one conflict was about to find himself at the center of another, and this time, he wasn't sure who he was fighting or who he could trust, but he was certain of one thing. He wasn't going to let Ara and thousands of others pay the price for someone else's betrayal, even if it meant going to war against his own people. The alarms. started blaring at 347 hours, 3 hours before dawn on New Geneva Station. Tay jerked awake to the sound of heavy boots pounding down the corridor outside their quarters. Through the small porthole, he could see military shuttles surrounding the station like predators circling wounded prey. "Ara, we need to go." "Now," he whispered, shaking her gently awake. She was alert instantly, the survival instincts from her training kicking in. "How many?" "Too many to fight." Tay was already pulling on his clothes and grabbing their emergency bag. 3 weeks of planning for this exact scenario was about to pay off. The emergency escape route they had memorized led through maintenance shafts that most people didn't know existed. As they crawled through the narrow spaces, they could hear security forces breaking down the door to their quarters, followed by angry shouts when they found the rooms empty. "Attention all station personnel," came an announcement over the intercom. "We are searching for 2 dangerous terrorists. Lieutenant Kim Tay and the Velari female Ara are wanted for conspiracy against interspecies peace. Anyone providing assistance will be arrested as accomplices." Ara's face went pale in the dim emergency lighting. "They're calling us terrorists." "Let them," Tay said grimly. "The real terrorists are the ones who've been enslaving your people for 3 centuries. They reached the docking bay where Kira had promised to have a ship waiting. The small cargo vessel looked like a piece of junk, but Tay knew that was intentional. Nobody would suspect fugitives to escape in something so unremarkable. "You made it," Kira said as they climbed aboard. "I wasn't sure you'd get past security." "Where are we going?" Tay asked as the ship lifted off, staying in the shadow of larger vessels to avoid detection. "Velari space. There's a training facility on Kepler 7 that processes about 200 young companions annually. If we're going to make a statement, that's where we do it." The journey took 5 days, jumping between systems and using smugglers' routes that didn't appear on any official star charts. During those long hours in hyperspace, they received messages from their remaining allies scattered across the galaxy. Dr. Vasquez had been arrested attempting to board a transport to the Peace Summit. Captain Park had vanished entirely, either captured or gone underground. Most devastating of all, Senator Vela sent word that the reform movement on Velari Prime was collapsing under government pressure. "They're calling it the Great Purification," Vela's message explained. "Anyone who supported companion rights is being branded as a cultural traitor. Families are disowning their own children for speaking out. The noble houses have convinced most of the population that you're human terrorists trying to destroy our way of life." But not all the news was bad. Reports were coming in from across Velari territory of companions beginning to resist their conditioning. Some were asking questions they had never been allowed to ask. Others were refusing orders for the first time in their lives. A few had even tried to escape their bonded masters. "It's working," Ara said, reading the reports. "What we did." "What we're doing, it's giving them hope." "Yeah, and it's also getting them killed," Kira replied darkly. "The backlash has been brutal. 3 companions were executed on Velari Prime yesterday for defying their sacred bonds. 2 training facilities have implemented new punishment protocols that are essentially torture." Tay felt sick. "We're making things worse for them." "No," Ara said firmly. "We're showing them that resistance is possible. Some of them will die, yes, but they'll die as people making their own choices, instead of living as property with no choices at all." When they reached Kepler 7, the training facility looked like a cross between a school and a prison. High walls, guard towers, and energy. Barriers surrounded a complex of buildings where hundreds of young Velari were being systematically conditioned into obedience. "Security is lighter than I expected," Kira observed through binoculars. "Most of their forces have probably been reassigned to hunt for us." "How do we get inside?" Tay asked. "We don't break in," Ara said with a slight smile. "We get invited." Her plan was simple and brilliant. She would present herself at the main gate, claiming to be an escaped companion seeking redemption, while the facility's administrators were distracted trying to figure out how to handle such an unprecedented situation. Tay and Kira would infiltrate from the rear and begin evacuating the trainees. It almost worked perfectly. Ara's performance was flawless. She approached the guards with the perfect combination of shame and desperation, begging to be allowed back into the system that had created her. The facility director, a pompous Valari male named Administrator Voss, was so excited about the propaganda value of a reformed terrorist that he invited news crews to witness her return to proper behavior. While cameras rolled and Voss gave speeches about the superiority of traditional values, Tay and Kira were moving through the dormitories, quietly waking young trainees and explaining that they were being rescued. "Is it true?" asked one girl who couldn't have been more than 16. "Are there really companions living free among the stars?" "It's true," Kira assured her, "and you can be one of them." But as they were loading the last group of children onto their hidden transport, everything went wrong. Administrator Voss had recognized Ara from news broadcasts and realized he was being played. Security alarms began screaming across the facility. "Go!" Tay shouted to Kira as armed guards poured into the courtyard. "Get them out of here!" The next few minutes were chaos. Tay fought his way through security forces trying to reach Ara, who was surrounded but refusing to surrender. The young trainees they had already rescued were crying and confused, torn between their conditioning that told them to obey authority and the hope that these strangers offered something better. In the end, they managed to escape with 43 children and teenagers, but at a terrible cost. Administrator Voss had broadcast the entire incident live across the Valari Empire, spinning it as a terrorist attack on innocent children by human extremists and their brainwashed accomplices. The humans want to steal our children and corrupt them with their barbaric ideas of individual freedom, Voss declared to the cameras. This is what their friendship really means, the destruction of everything we hold sacred. The broadcast sparked riots across a dozen Valari worlds. Angry mobs attacked human embassies and businesses. 3 human diplomats were killed on Valari, prime before emergency security could restore order. But it also sparked something else. Within hours of the broadcast, reports began flooding in of companions across the Empire openly defying their masters. Some were killed for their defiance. Others were severely punished. But more and more were choosing resistance over submission. "We've started something that can't be stopped," Ara said as they watched the news reports from their hidden base on an asteroid mining station. "Every companion who sees that broadcast will know that escape is possible. And every noble family will know their property is becoming unreliable," Kira added. "They'll accelerate the disposal protocols. Thousands of companions will be killed to prevent them from being influenced by our example." Tay looked at the 43 young faces around him, children who had never made their own decisions, never chosen their own clothes, never even picked what to eat for breakfast. They were looking at him with a mixture of hope and terror, waiting for him to tell them what to do next. "Then we'd better move fast," he said. "If we're going to save them, we need to hit harder and faster than anyone expects." The hunt was just beginning, but so was the revolution, and Tay was starting to understand that sometimes the only way to end a war was to make sure the right side won it, even if that meant becoming the very thing his enemies called him, a terrorist fighting for freedom, for the sea. Question was whether 50,000 people would still be alive when the fighting finally stopped. The Galactic Peace Summit was supposed to be humanity's greatest diplomatic achievement. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered on the neutral world of Harmony Station to celebrate the end of the human Valari War and establish new frameworks for interspecies cooperation. What nobody expected was for 2 of the galaxy's most wanted fugitives to crash the party. Tay and Ara had spent 3 weeks planning their infiltration. With security forces from both species hunting them across 12 star systems, their only chance was to hide in plain sight. Among the thousands of diplomats, journalists, and staff attending the summit, "Remember," Kira said as she helped them put on their disguises, "you get one shot at this. The moment security realizes who you are, it's over." Tay adjusted the holographic projector that made him look like a middle-aged human diplomat from the outer colonies. Ara's disguise was more complex, neural inhibitors that temporarily suppressed her natural Valari markings, making her appear to be from one of the newer species that had recently joined the galactic community. "The main assembly doesn't start for 2 hours, Ara said, checking her chrono. "That gives us time to get the evidence packages into position." They had spent weeks preparing multiple copies of everything, financial records, genetic manipulation, protocols, witness testimonies, video evidence from the training facilities. Each package was hidden throughout the station, programmed to upload simultaneously to every major news network in the galaxy. Getting into the summit turned out to be easier than expected. With so many species attending, security was focused on preventing weapons and explosives, not identifying individuals. Their forged credentials passed 3 different checkpoints without question. The main assembly hall was a massive dome that could hold 10,000 beings. Representatives sat in species-specific sections, with humans and Velari positioned on opposite sides of the chamber as a symbolic gesture of their new peace. At the center, a raised platform held the podium where speakers would address the gathering. "There," Ara whispered, pointing to a maintenance access panel near the platform. "That's our way to the communication controls." They were moving through the crowd when everything went wrong. "Lieutenant Kim Tay," came a voice behind them that made Tay's blood freeze. "I was wondering when you'd show up." They turned to see Admiral Morrison, one of the human officers they had identified as being complicit in the companion cover-up. He was flanked by security guards from both species, and his smile was cold as ice. "Did you really think we wouldn't be watching for you?" Morrison continued. "Every entrance to this station has been monitored. We've been tracking you since you landed." "Then why didn't you arrest us immediately?" Tay asked, his hand moving slowly toward the emergency transmitter in his pocket. "Because we wanted to see what you were planning," said a Velari voice. Senator Koss, the same pompous official who had originally presented Ara to Tay, stepped out from behind the guards. "Imagine our surprise when we realized you intended to disrupt the most important diplomatic gathering in galactic history." Ara stepped closer to Tay. "You can't stop what we've started. The truth is already spreading." "What truth?" Koss laughed. "The fantasies of a defective companion and a disgraced human soldier. Please." But even as he spoke, Tay could see something happening in the crowd around them. People were checking their personal communicators, their faces showing confusion and then shock as news reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. The evidence packages were uploading right on schedule. Morrison noticed it too. "Arrest them," he snapped to the guards. "Now." That's when Tay made the most important decision of his life. Instead of trying to escape or fight, he activated his voice amplifier and began to speak. His words boomed across the assembly hall, cutting through the diplomatic chatter and causing thousands of beings to look in his direction. "My name is Lieutenant Kim Tay," he called out. "I'm the human soldier who was honored for ending the war between our species. But I'm here today to tell you about a war that has been going on for 3 centuries. A war against innocent people that most of you don't even know exists." Security guards were pushing through the crowd toward them, but the assembled diplomats were listening. And more importantly, the news cameras were turning in their direction. "For the past 4 months, I've been investigating the Velari companion system," Tay continued, his voice growing stronger. "What I've found is systematic slavery on a scale that defies belief. 50,000 sentient beings bred like livestock, genetically modified to be obedient, trained from childhood to have no will of their own." The Velari section erupted in angry protests, but representatives from other species were leaning forward with interest. This was news to most of them. "Show them," Tay said to Ara. Ara stepped forward, and with a gesture that took incredible courage, she deactivated her disguise. Her natural blue skin and silver markings appeared, causing gasps throughout the assembly. But more importantly, she stood straight and tall, looking directly at the cameras with the confidence of someone who had learned to think for herself. "I am Ara of the bonded caste," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. "I was bred to be property, trained to have no thoughts of my own, given as a gift to this man, as a reward for his heroism." She gestured to Tay. "But he showed me something I had never been allowed to see before. He showed me that I am a person, not a thing, that I have the right to make my own choices, to dream my own dreams, to live my own life." By now, security forces had reached the platform, but something strange was happening. Some of the guards, the ones who looked like they might be from the bonded caste themselves, had stopped moving. They were listening to Ara's words with expressions of wonder and recognition. "In the past 4 months, I have felt joy for the first time," Ara continued. "I have felt anger at injustice. I have felt hope for a better future. I have felt love that was freely given and freely received. These are not emotions that property should have. These are the feelings of a free person." Senator Koss was shouting orders, but his voice was being drowned out by the murmur of the crowd. Diplomats were reading the evidence on their communicators, their faces showing horror as they realized the scope of what they were learning about. "The evidence you're seeing now," Tay said, "shows financial records proving that certain human military officers were bribed to remain silent about this system. It shows genetic manipulation protocols that violate 17 interspecies treaties. It shows disposal plans to eliminate 40,000 companions whose only crime is becoming inconvenient." Admiral Morrison was pushing through the crowd, his face twisted with rage. "Shut them up!" he screamed. "This is treason!" But it was too late. The cat was out of the bag, and it had claws. Ambassador Chen, the senior human diplomat, stepped forward with his own voice amplifier. "Admiral Morrison, you are relieved of duty pending investigation. All security forces stand down immediately." The Valari section was in chaos. Some senators were calling for Tay and Ara's immediate execution. Others were demanding answers about the evidence. A few, led by Senator Vela, were openly weeping as they realized the magnitude of their civilization's crimes. "The question before us today," Tay said as relative quiet returned to the hall, "is simple. Are we going to be the generation that ends 3 centuries of systematic oppression, or are we going to be the generation that looks the other way while 50,000 people are murdered to protect the profits of the powerful?" The applause started slowly from the section where the newer species sat. Then it spread to the human delegation and finally to some of the younger Valari representatives. It wasn't universal. Many beings sat in shocked silence or angry opposition. But it was enough. The trial by fire was over. The truth was out. Now came the hard part, figuring out what to do about it. But for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Tay felt like they might actually win. 6 months after the peace summit, Tay stood in what used to be the largest companion training facility in the Valari Empire. The place that had once housed over 1,000 young beings, destined for a life of servitude, was now something completely different. The dormitories had been converted into comfortable living spaces. The punishment chambers had been torn down entirely. The training halls where children learned to suppress their own thoughts and desires were now classrooms where former companions learned skills they had never been allowed to develop. "How many today?" Ara asked, joining him at the window that overlooked the courtyard, where dozens of blue-skinned Valari were engaged in what looked like a heated discussion. 43 new arrivals from the Outer Rim territories," Tay replied. "Most of them have never made a decision more complex than choosing what to eat for breakfast." It had been a long, difficult 6 months. The collapse of the companion system hadn't happened overnight, and it certainly hadn't happened peacefully. 3 Valari noble houses had attempted armed resistance before being stopped by their own military forces. Riots had broken out on a dozen worlds, as traditional families struggled to accept that their way of life was ending. 2 assassination attempts had been made against Ty and Ara, and they still traveled with security details. But the changes were undeniable. The Galactic Council had passed the Universal Rights Accord within a week of the Peace Summit, making the breeding and bonding of sentient beings illegal across all member territories. The Valari High Senate, facing economic sanctions and internal revolt, had voted to dissolve the companion system and provide reparations to all former servants. Most importantly, the freed companions were proving every day that they were far more than the broken property their former masters had believed them to be. "Ara!" called a voice from the courtyard. They looked down to see Kira waving at them from the middle of the discussion group. She had been appointed as the director of the rehabilitation center, and her transformation from hidden fugitive to confident leader had been remarkable to watch. They made their way downstairs to join the group. What Ty had thought was a heated discussion turned out to be something much more positive. Former companions sharing their experiences and helping newer arrivals understand their options. Tell them about your job, Vel, Kira was saying to a young male who had been liberated from a training center on Valari Prime. Vel stood up with obvious pride. I work for the Orbital Construction Company now. I design structural supports for space stations. My supervisor says I have natural talent for engineering that was never allowed to develop. A recently arrived female raised her hand timidly. But how do you know what you want to do? I've never been allowed to want anything. This was the question that broke Tay's heart every time he heard it. How do you teach someone to have desires when they've been programmed since birth to have none? Start small, said Mira, another success story. I began by choosing which color shirt to wear each morning. It took me 3 weeks to be able to make that decision without asking someone else. Now I run my own business designing clothing for former companions who are learning to express themselves. Ara stepped forward to address the group. Over the months, she had become incredibly skilled at helping others navigate the transition from servitude to freedom. I want to tell you something. That might surprise you, she said. The first emotion I learned to feel wasn't happiness or joy. It was fear. Fear that I was making the wrong choices. Fear that I wasn't good enough to be free. Fear that someone would take this new life away from me. The group listened intently. Many of them were nodding in recognition. But then I realized something, Ara continued. Fear is a choice too. I could choose to be afraid or I could choose to be brave, and every day I wake up and make that choice again. After the session ended and the former companions dispersed to their various activities, Tay and Ara walked together through the gardens that had replaced the facility's old punishment yards. These quiet moments together had become precious to both of them. I got a message from Admiral Stone today, Tay said. She's been cleared of all charges and promoted to head the new Interspecies Rights Commission. That's wonderful news, Ara replied. What about the others who were involved in the cover-up? Morrison and 6 other senior officers are facing court-martial. The trials start next month. Tay paused by a bench where they often sat to watch the sunset. She also offered us both permanent positions with the commission. We'd be traveling to different worlds, investigating reports of rights violations, setting up more rehabilitation centers. Ara was quiet for a moment. What did you tell her? I told her I'd discuss it with my partner and get back to her. The word partner still felt new and wonderful to both of them. It had taken months for their relationship to evolve, from the forced bonding that had brought them together to something based on genuine choice and mutual respect. The first time Ara had told him she loved him, freely, without any conditioning or obligation, Tay had cried with joy. I think we should take it, Ara said. There are probably thousands of situations like this across the galaxy that we don't even know about yet. Tay smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. They sat on the bench and watched the former companions in the courtyard below. Some were reading books, many for the first time in their lives. Others were working on art projects, exploring creativity that had been suppressed for decades. A few were engaged in what looked like a friendly argument about politics, exercising the right to disagree that they had never been allowed to have. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had just accepted the traditional bonding ceremony? Tay asked. Ara considered the question seriously. I think I would have lived my entire life as your property, never knowing that I could be anything more, and 50,000 other people would have continued to suffer in silence. Do you regret any of it? The danger, the fighting, the fact that we can never have a normal, quiet life? Ara took his hand, a gesture that still amazed him with its simple freedom. The choice to touch or not to touch, to show affection or withhold it, to love or not to love. Tay, she said, I spent the first 25 years of my life never making a single meaningful choice. Now I get to choose to fight for justice, to help people find their freedom, to love someone who sees me as an equal. If that's not a normal life, then I don't want normal. As the sun set over what had once been a place of oppression and was now a symbol of hope, they watched Kira begin the evening session, where newer arrivals learned from those who had been free longer. Tonight's topic was setting personal goals, something that would have been unthinkable for any of these people just months ago. Ambassador Tay and Ambassador Ara called one of the security guards. The transport to the next system is ready when you are. They looked at each other and smiled. Tomorrow they would be investigating reports of forced labor on a mining colony in the Centauri system. Next week, they would be establishing a new rehabilitation center for freed workers on an agricultural world. The work was never finished, but it was work worth doing. As they walked toward their transport, Ara stopped and looked back at the facility one more time. "What is it?" Tay asked. "I was just thinking about that little girl who chose white flowers with silver edges for her garden. She never could have imagined that someday she would be free to choose to spend her life fighting for other people's freedom." Tay squeezed her hand. She probably never imagined she would fall in love with a stubborn human soldier either. "Oh, that part was easy," Ara said with a laugh. "Falling in love with someone who sees you as a person instead of property, that wasn't a choice I had to learn how to make. That was as natural as breathing." As their ship lifted off into the star-filled night, carrying them toward their next mission, the lights in the rehabilitation center continued to shine below. In classrooms and common areas, former slaves were learning to be free people, and in the gardens where punishment yards used to be, white flowers with silver edges bloomed in the darkness, chosen by someone who had finally learned that she had the right to choose. The war for freedom was far from over, but tonight 50,000 people slept as free beings instead of property, and that was a victory worth celebrating, even as they prepared for the next battle in humanity's endless fight for justice and dignity across the stars.